welcome back to the next part of our falling object game tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be adding in bullets. So currently in our game we have our objects moving and controllable, and we set up collisions where if we have a collision between the falling object and the player, the falling object reacts to that by moving itself back up off the top of the screen so that it can fall back down again. So if you watch the scene view there, you'll see I hit it, he moves right back to the top and falls again. So today what we want to be able to do is make this game a little more interesting, and we want to talk about how we can set up our bullets, how we can make a bullet come into the scene when we push a button, and have that bullet move up the screen, and if there's time we'll get it colliding with our falling object. So that's our plan for this video. So first thing we're going to need is a bullet object to play with here. So if I look at my falling object sprites here that I brought in, I've got this yellow capsule here. I'm going to use that as my bullet. So I'm just going to drag one of those out into the scene. There it is. And let's go ahead and rename this as bullet, like that. And then bullet is going to need a script, because we are going to make a bullet, and that bullet then is going to move itself straight up the screen. So when I make the bullet, I'm going to make it happen at the player's position here, and then its job is going to be just to move straight up the screen, and for now that's all it's going to do. Right? We'll handle collisions later. So let's give him a script. So let's make one. So new script, we'll call this the bullet script. Let's open that up in MonoDevelop. Here's our bullet script. Alright, so when the bullet is made, what we want it to do is just move straight up the screen at a certain speed. So this will be the third time we've done movement in here. We're going to do the same type of an idea that we did for our falling object. The falling object falls straight down the screen. We want the bullet to move straight up the screen. So you actually probably know how to do this already. What we're going to want to use is the command transform.translate. So in the bullet script here, in the update function, because remember, every frame we want it to update its position, we're going to say transform.translate. And then we have to give it a vector 3 to move by. So we want it to move on the y-axis, right? Let's click on my bullet here. Alright, zoom in. Here's the y-axis, the green arrow here. I want it to move on the y-axis. I want it to move in a positive direction on the y-axis. As we get bigger, if you look in the inspector over here, you see the values here are going to get bigger as I go up the screen. So we want it to move in a positive y direction, and we want to move it a little bit every frame. So transform.translate, what we want is a vector 3. And the vector 3 we want is vector 3 up. Vector 3 up, you can even see in the code commenting here, it gives you a vector 3 that has a 0 for x, a positive 1 for y, and a 0 for z. So this will move us in the positive y direction. And as before, we also want to make sure we move this over time, not by frame. So we're going to do that by taking it times time.delta time. And then just like we did before, we need to have control of the speed of this. So we need a variable to control its speed. So up here in our variables, let's do a public, let's just do an int here. We'll call this speed, and we will go ahead and set that speed out in the inspector so we can kind of play with it a little bit and see what a good speed is. So we're going to have to then take our speed and factor it in here to our movement. And this is pretty much exactly the same thing we did for our falling object, except we're going a vector 3 up instead of a vector 3 down. So let's go out and see if our bullet moves now. Let's go into Unity. Let's click on my bullet and let's give it the script. So let's hand off our script to the bullet here by dragging and dropping it. Let's give it a speed of maybe 25. Let's see what that looks like. And when we hit play, let's actually move our bullet down so it kind of comes from here. And when we hit play, let's see what happens. And there it goes. It zips. And actually 25 right now doesn't look like a bad speed. Okay, we don't want it to go too fast. We don't want it to go too slow either. We can play with that more later, but I think 25 looks fine for now. So our bullet is now moving up the screen. Now the next thing we want to talk about here for the bullet is what to do with this bullet when it's not on the screen anymore. So I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to pause here. Now when the bullet starts going off the top of the screen here, we no longer need it. If I was to let this continue to play, and zoom way out here, you'll notice that that bullet is just going to continue to go on forever and ever up the screen because I never told it to do anything else. So this isn't a big deal when there's just one bullet, but what if I've been playing this game for a while and I've sprayed out 100 or 1,000 bullets? If the computer has to keep track of all those bullets and keep moving them every frame, see, it's still going, then that after a while will cause our game to start slowing down and getting some lag because we are moving all these bullets we don't care about. So what we want to do here with our bullet, after it reaches the top of the screen, we want to get rid of it. We're not going to reuse bullets in this example like we're reusing the falling objects because there's just going to be a bunch of them. So we're just going to be creating and destroying bullets as needed. So we need to know how to get rid of this bullet once it goes off the top of the screen. So the first thing we need to know is, well, where is that point that the bullet is no longer going to be useful to us? So let's look to see where the bullet is no longer on the screen. So let's zoom in on it here a little bit. And it looks like once it gets to right about here, we're looking at the y-axis, right about a 15.3. Let's let it go as far as 15.5 because that way we have more of a rounded off number here that's easier to remember. So 15.5 will be our coordinate. Once the bullet reaches or passes this coordinate here, let's have it destroy itself. Okay, just remove itself from the game. So let's go into our code and talk about how to do that. So after we move our bullet, so this is kind of the pattern if you've noticed. The first thing we usually do is we move the object, so whatever it is, this is the bullet. After we move it, that's when we do our checks. So check to see if the bullet has left the top of the screen. Whenever we're going to check something, we're probably talking about a conditional statement. So let's put an if statement in here. And we basically said if the bullet's position on the y-axis, so remember to get that, you go to the transform. And then from the transform, you get the position. And then this time I want the y. If that gets to be bigger than, because we're going up in a positive direction, what did I say, 17.5? Let's double check that because I forgot my number already. Let's see, 17.5 was too much, wasn't it? Was it 15.5 that we said? Nope, actually, yes. 15.5 was the number that we said. So if we get bigger than that 15.5, then what we wanted to do is to remove the bullet from the game. To do that, we have a command that we use. It's called destroy. We're going to destroy. We have to tell it in the parentheses here what to destroy. We're just going to destroy the game object that this script is attached to, so we can just say game object like this. And whenever I just refer to a game object here, this is going to refer to the object the script's attached to, unless I tell it different. In this case, this game object will be this game object. You could even write it like this if you want. You could say this dot game object if you want to. This is just a keyword that means refer to the, like it says here, current instance of the class. So you could write that if that makes more sense. You don't need it though. Okay, so we're going to remove this bullet from the game. Whenever you remove the game object, it removes the object and everything connected to it. So let's save this, and let's move our bullet back down here so we can see it on the screen. And then let's see if it pops out of existence. So you notice it's in my hierarchy. It's right here. If I hit play now, when it reaches the top of the screen, see how it disappeared? It's no longer in my hierarchy. It's no longer showing up here. It's been totally removed from my game and therefore will not be taking up memory or processor power to keep moving a bullet we don't need anymore. Alright, so we have been able to successfully destroy our bullet when it gets off the top of the screen. Alright, so the next job here is going to be how to make these bullets when we want them. Alright, how do we shoot a bullet from our player? So that's going to get us into a new topic, which is called instantiation, or spawning things in, I guess, for another term. So what I want to have happen now is when I'm playing my game, when I push a key on the keyboard, I want to make a bullet, and then I want that bullet just to go up and do its thing. Okay, so I'm just going to fire and forget this bullet. So you got to ask yourself, okay, what object is going to fire the bullet so that we know what script to put that code in? And the answer would be, in this case, the player, because the player is handling all our keyboard input right now with the left and right keys to move left and right. So we will also give it an input for firing. Okay, we're going to pick a key to use for firing. So in this example, I'm going to use the spacebar. Pretty standard key to use for firing things in a game like this is spacebar. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out how to make the player fire a bullet when we push the spacebar. Here's the player script. So remember, we're getting input right here for the left and right buttons using this input get axis horizontal. So let's see if we have another built-in input for getting a key, or getting just a button on the keyboard. So we're going to go back out to Unity. Let's go to Edit, Project Settings, Input. This is where we go to get the input manager. Here is the horizontal axis that we're currently using for left and right movement. And then what we want to do is get one that has the space bar. Now, I know from just using it that if I go to jump here, jump is already set to the space bar. So I'm just going to use jump, but since jump doesn't make sense as a name for what I'm doing, I'm going to change its name right here, so you can customize these. I'm going to change this to shoot. And you notice when I changed the name here, it changed the name here. So now I've just renamed this input as shoot. Shoot has a positive button that is the space button. It's set up for a key or a mouse button, so we're good. Everything is fine here. I just needed to change the name. So now I've got an input here called shoot that is set to my space bar. Back in my code, then in the player script, I can add something in my update function here that handles input for shooting. So I can really put this almost anywhere I want to in my update function. Remember, anytime we're getting input from a keyboard or a joystick or a mouse, we want to do that in the update function so that we are checking for input every frame. We want to get the input as quickly as possible. So let's find the end. Got a lot of things commented out in here. This is the end of my update function. Here is where we're handling input for moving, and we're moving. Here we're handling the edges of the screen. This is our screen wrapping code that we just have in here in case we want it later. So let's just make kind of a new area in my update function. So I'm still in update. I'm just making a spot here. And let's do this for shooting bullets. Alright, so the first thing we want to do from shooting bullets is we want to get input from the keyboard. Alright, and then once we get that input, we want to create a new bullet. And that's basically it for now. We're just going to get input, and when we get that input, we're going to create a new bullet. So to get input from the keyboard, we're going to find out if the spacebar has been pressed. So we're going to use the conditional statement here. We're going to say if. So every frame in the update function, when we get to this part of it, we're going to ask a question. We're going to say if, and then what I want to do is check for that spacebar. So that's in my input. So if input dot, now this time I want to do something called get button. Okay, and we're going to say get button down. If you look at the description here, this is going to return a true during the frame the user pressed down the virtual button identified by the button name. Okay, and that's in the input manager, the virtual button. It's the space bar. So I'm going to use get button down, and then I have to tell it what the name of that button is. Well, in the input manager, remember I renamed that to shoot, just like that. So this is going to go to the input manager. It's going to find out what button I assigned the shoot, which was the space bar. And the very first frame I push it down is going to make this turn into a true. In a conditional statement, remember, if the condition is true, it will do the instructions that we tell it below. So let's give it open close curly brackets. And then this is where we're going to create our new bullet. So let's move this comment up here where it belongs. So if it's true, we create a new bullet. Now, to create a new bullet, we have to make a copy, or in Unity they call it making a clone of our bullet object. Okay, so before we can do that, we need to make our bullet object into something called a prefab. So I'm going to go back out to Unity here. I've got my bullet here. I've got him set up how I want for now with his script. Right? He's acting the way I want him to, so I'm going to make him into a prefab. A prefab is short for prefabrication, and basically it's going to make this bullet into a blueprint that we can make other bullets from. So think of prefabs as blueprints or master copies of an object that you, or masters of an object that you want to make copies of. So in my asset panel here, I'm going to drag him down in. So to make a prefab, I can just grab the object, I can drag it to my project panel and just drop it in. When I do that, Unity will automatically save this as like the master blueprint or a prefab of the bullet. So this bullet here, when I make more copies of it, it will copy this bullet and drop it into my scene. You'll notice up here in the hierarchy that the bullet turned blue, the name, and that tells you that this bullet is now a prefab. Okay? If I click on the bullet here now, you'll notice we got some extra things in the inspector. It has now a prefab label right here, and we have some different buttons here that allow us to modify the prefab or modify this instance of the prefab, right? This particular bullet that was made from it, so it can be different from others. But we'll get in these buttons later. But we have made a bullet. So now that I've got it saved in my project panel, I don't need it out here. When the game starts, I don't want just some random bullet to fire off. So I'm just going to hit my delete key here and delete the bullet from the scene. It's saved right here, and see, look, I can drag one out and it drops it in. I can drag another one out. I can just keep dragging these out all day if I want to, and it makes a copy or a clone of the master. All right, so let's delete all these out of the scene. The next thing we're going to want to do now is learn how to, in our code, set up the process of making copies of a prefab, or what Unity calls instantiate. So to instantiate a bullet, we're going to go into the player script here, and right here we already have the code for getting input from our spacebar, which is our shoot button that we set up in the input manager. So what I need to do now is every time I push the shoot button, I want to create a new bullet, and as I just mentioned, that is what Unity calls instantiating. So we're going to instantiate a new bullet. It starts out with the command instantiate right there, and instantiate needs some information. It needs the original object that we want to make a copy of, because it's going to copy this. It's going to return to us a clone of the object and put it out in the scene. So I need to put in an object here, and then I have to specify a position and a rotation to put this at. So let's first of all set up for the object, because our bullet script here, or our player script, I'm sorry, does not know what this object is. We actually have to set up a storage place in our memory to hold our bullet object. So I'm going to go up to the top where we do our variables, and I'm going to make a public, and we're just going to make this a game object, so we can store an entire game object in here, and we'll call this bullet. Alright, so this will hold a link to the bullet prefab, and we'll fill that in the inspector, so we can drag that in there, and then our code here will know what it is supposed to make. So then down here in our instantiate command, we will tell it to make a bullet, and then we can tell it position and a rotation to put this at. So I want this bullet to drop right in the same exact spot that my player is currently in. So I'm going to feed it in the player's transform here. So transform.position will make the bullet position itself right in the center of my player. And then the rotation, I'm just going to give it the same rotation as my player as well. So I'm going to say transform.rotation, which will set the bullet to the same local rotation as the player. So now the bullet will basically drop in right exactly where the player is sitting. All right, these are the three pieces of information that we're going to give it when we instantiate or clone in a new bullet. We give it the object, the position to create the object at, and how to rotate it. I'm going to save this now. If I go out into Unity, I can click on my player that has that player script. And then over here in his script, you see there is now a spot for a bullet. That's a game object. It says none in there because nothing has been assigned. So this is where I go to my project panel and I find my bullet prefab right here. And I can just drag him right over and drop him right here into my bullet variable slot here in the bullet script. So now my script will know when I ask for a bullet to get one of these, my bullet prefabs. This is my master copy of my bullet. It will then make a clone of that and drop it into my scene, and it's going to drop it right here on top of my player. Alright, so let's just test this out and see if I missed any steps here. So we're playing. Alright, so when I hit the space bar, I got a bullet. Did you see that? And the bullet jumped right out of the middle of my player, and it's shooting straight up the screen. And they're disappearing when they get to the top, just like we wanted to. But we do have the bullet now firing, and it knows where to make itself, and it takes care of itself because as soon as it pops into existence, its bullet script takes over, which moves it up the screen and causes it to be removed at the top. So that is firing bullets. That is instantiating or cloning or spawning, whatever you want to call it, an object into our scene. So just quick review what we did. We were waiting for our spacebar to be held down or to be pushed, and then whenever it got pushed, we were making a bullet, and we put it right where the player was and at the player's rotation. Then the bullet script would take over and start moving that bullet up the screen at its speed until it reached the top of the screen where we can no longer see it, and then it destroys itself. So that's the whole series of events that we have factored in here right now. So let's do one last thing here in this section. Let's actually set the bullet up for collision and see if we can have the bullet make the falling object reset itself when it hits the falling object like it's supposed to. So we're going to need to do some more collision detection, but first we have to change our bullet here a little bit. So I'm going to drag a bullet out into the scene so that I can work on it. And we're going to modify this bullet a little bit and then store it and save the changes back to the prefab. So when it's out here in the hierarchy, this is a copy. So whatever I do to the copy does not affect the prefab in the project panel. So I can kind of customize these out here to do different things, but when I'm done, I'm going to want to make the changes go back to my prefab so that all the bullets from here on out will have that. So if you remember, to do collisions, we need a collider on this object. So let's add a 2D collider to our bullet. I'm going to go with a box collider because this bullet is mostly rectangular in shape. It's like a rounded rectangle. And when I drop the collider and you see how it matched right up with the outside edges, again, I'm going to pull it in just a little bit size-wise so that it doesn't just barely graze an object and get a hit. And I'm going to pull it a little bit smaller on the Y there so that we'll get a little bit of an overlap visually before the bullet pops out. It'll look like it impacted it a little bit better. We're going to mark this as a trigger. Otherwise, this is going to act as a physical barrier, and we actually want this to be a trigger so that it will cause the onTriggerEnter 2D function that we put in our falling object to fire off. So our bullet is now set up for collisions. The bullet does not need a rigid body because the falling object here has a rigid body. So in collisions, at least one of the objects has to have a rigid body, not both. So in this case, I'm not going to worry about putting one on the bullet. I'm just going to put the trigger collider, because we're going to have the falling object here take care of collisions with bullets in its script. Okay, so now that I made the change to my bullet, to make the changes go back to my prefab, I can go over here and I can click this button under prefab here that says apply. Apply means take whatever I've done to the bullet out here in the hierarchy, the selected one, and just make the prefab look like it. So I'm just going to save the changes back. So when I hit apply here and then go click on the one on my project panel, you see it now has the box collider that I just added, and it's set up exactly the same as the one out here in the scene. So now my working copy here, I can get rid of that because I changed things and saved it back here to my prefab. And now when I make bullets, they'll be created in my script with this box collider on them. Okay, and so let's actually go clean up all this stuff that's spam on our console here. Remember way back, one of those first videos, we were doing this debug.log right here in the player script. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that now. We don't need to see that information anymore because we understand what input get access does. All right, so let's save that change. Now in my falling object script, in my onTrigger enter 2D, when a bullet hits this object, it should now reposition itself to the top. So let's actually just see if that's working. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can shoot this guy. And there you go. You notice how as soon as the bullet hit him, whoops, I missed that time. As soon as the bullet hit him, he jumped back up to the top. Let's make this a little bigger so we can actually see what's happening in our scene view here. So if I shoot this guy, he goes back to the top. If I let him hit me, he goes back to the top. No matter what hits the falling object right now, it's repositioning itself back to the top of the screen, just like I told it to. Okay. Now you'll notice though that my bullet keeps going, so it hits this falling object and it just keeps going up the screen. So we do want to fix that, because when we hit something with the bullet, we want to use that bullet up. We want it to be destroyed as well, and that's easy enough thing to add. Let's go add that into our script here for our falling object. So what we can say here now is go ahead and move to the top, but let's go ahead and destroy the thing that just hit us. Okay, so if you remember on trigger enter, and this is in the falling objects script, so when the falling object hits something that has a trigger collider, it's going to capture information about the other object in the collision under this name other. So other becomes whatever just hit us. Okay, so in this case, if the bullet hits us, the bullet will be known as other. So that gives me a link to the bullet. So what I can do here now is I can remove the other object from the game. And to do that, I can use my destroy command. And what do I want to destroy? I want to destroy other. And what of the other do I want to destroy? I want to destroy the other's game object. Okay? Because remember, other is a collider 2D. So I don't want to just destroy the collider on the object. I want to destroy the entire object. So I have to say, okay, go to the other object and destroy its game object. Okay? So let's run this and see what happens. Because you're going to see that we're going to have a bit of an issue here, perhaps, with how this is written. So here we go. Okay, so let's see if I can shoot this guy. So now the bullet disappeared. Let's see if I can shoot him again. Okay, so the bullet is now disappearing when we hit it. But what happens when I let it hit me? Do you notice that my player is now gone? He's out of the game because when the falling object hit the player, that caused this to go off because the player has a collider on it that will trigger this collision, and it said destroy the other game object. So other is whatever the falling object hits. So if it hits the player, it's going to destroy the player as well, and that's not what we want to have in this game right now. We want it just to destroy the other object if it's a bullet. So that brings us to another new topic or concept here in Unity, which is the idea of using what are called tags. So out here in Unity on my bullet, I want to give it something that will make it unique. So all the bullets will have the same unique identifier on them that I can then check for in a collision. So Unity has a great built-in system called tags, and if I go up here to the inspector, you see right here we've got the word tag. Right now it's untagged. So what I can do is I can define a tag that I can give to all the bullets, and they'll all have the same tag. So if I open up this, there's a few that are already kind of populated in here. I don't want to use any of these. I'm going to add a tag, so I'm going to click right here, and then I get my tag list. These are my predefined tags. List is empty. I can hit this little plus sign here to add a new tag. I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call this bullet, and I'm going to hit save. So now I have in my tags a new tag called bullet. Now you got to remember exactly how you spell this and how you capitalize it and everything so that you can make it the same in your code. So it's going to look for exactly this when we go back to the code. So now that I made the tag, I have to apply it. So I'm going to go back to my bullet prefab. I'm going to go back to tag and hit the drop down, and now you'll see that new one I just made showed up in the list. So I can select that. So now my bullet is tagged as a bullet, and since I'm working on the prefab and not one out in the hierarchy, it automatically changes that. See, there's no button here to apply the change like when I pulled it out into the scene. So you can make changes directly here to the prefab. Sometimes you just need to see like where the edges of colliders are and things. You have to drag it out into the hierarchy, which is why I did that before. Alright, so now I've got a tag. So with the tag in place, I can now go and make a slight change in my script. I can say now that before I remove the other object from the game, I can do a check here. I can now check to see if what we just hit is a bullet. Okay? And to do that, I can use an if statement. And the command I want is one that will allow me to compare the tag of the object I just hit with one that I'm looking for. And the command is called compare tag. What compare tag does is it takes in a string right here in the parentheses. That's the name of the tag I'm looking for. So I'm looking for bullet, just like that. Okay, so now this says if the thing that we just hit, if its tag is bullet. So we actually have to tell it what object, because I didn't tell it what to do. If other, alright, so I have to tell it what object to check the tag on. So I'm going to say other dot, that means in the other game object, compare that tag of the other object with bullet, and if they're the same, then I want to remove it. So I'm going to put my open and my closing brackets for the if statement here, and tell it to destroy the other game object if the tags match up. If it's a bullet, then destroy it. So let's save this and make sure that all this is acting the way that I expect it to. And let's let this object hit my player. And you notice this time the object repositioned itself like it's supposed to, but it did not destroy my player. But if I shoot one of these, let's see if I can get one here, get under one. Not going to make it. Here we go. If I shoot one now, you notice how the bullet did get destroyed. It did go away. So it is making the connection there between the tags. So if it's not a bullet, it's not destroying the other game object. If it is a bullet, it is destroying that bullet. And that's exactly what we wanted it to do. So now we have our bullets being instantiated into the scene. When we push the space bar, and we can shoot the falling object. The falling object can react to the bullet, and the falling object can react to the bullet differently than it reacts to the player. And that's good because we want it to have different reactions as we build our game fuller here. So we're going to stop this video right here with our bullet being pretty much complete, and then in the next video we'll pick up our next topic. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you're enjoying the videos and that they're helpful to you. Feel free to ask questions in the comments below.